Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because John Tenuto and Maria Jose Tenuto board the mothership to discuss their newest book, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, the making of a classic film. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, John and Maria Jose. Thank you so much for coming to Vertical Stars Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I've really enjoyed reading your newest book, which is Star Trek: The Search for Spock, the making of a classic film, which was phenomenal, and I learned a lot from it. So I want to thank you guys so much for making it.
Thank you.
Now, this is your second book for Star Trek, right? Did you do one for the motion pictures? I know you did one for Wrath of Khan. Did you do one for the first one?
No, the first one was done. The first one was actually not quite a making of book. It was an art book. So they really don't have the making of for the Star Trek the motion picture yet. But that was a beautiful art book that was done by Jeff Bond, and I'll definitely pick it up. And it certainly looks like it belongs in the alongside our books. So it's a definite. If you enjoyed ours, I think people would really enjoy the first motion picture art book because it looks like same exact size. It goes really nice. It looks nice next to ours, even though it's not. It's a little bit different. It's certainly a making of book, but it's focused on the incredible art, production art that was done on the first movie. So definitely worth picking up.
Now, having had the good fortune to read The Search for Spock, making of book that you guys did, I can't imagine just how many hours it took to assemble all those stories, the interviews, the images. So you clearly guys are hardcore Trek fans. So can you give me some background on where that love came from, what inspired it?
Yeah, I'll start with just because I'm older, so historically, will be historically accurate, linear. Um, so I've been a fan my whole life. I was born when the original show was on, but a little too young to watch it. Um, and I really got into it more through the animated show when that was first on in the early 1970s, through the Mego toys, and of course through the reruns. And then stayed. That was my fandom my whole life. As only I've only added to it a little bit with things like Star Wars and things like that, but Star Trek's always been there for me. And that's kind of how I got into it, thankfully, from the Montgomery Ward bargain basement. um, they had which was a regional thing if people don't know what that was, but Chicago had a bargain basement store for Montgomery Wards, which used to be a huge retailer across the country. And they had the Enterprise bridge play set from Mego and the action figures, and my mom was able to get them all for me for Christmas. And that started my love of Star Trek, both on screen and off screen.
And then I knew about Star Trek: The Next Generation because my brother would have it on. And so you know, heard the theme and I knew the names like Captain Picard. But it really wasn't until I met John. I was working on my master's degree and he was catching up on Deep Space Nine. He would record the episodes and I would hear words like power wraiths and I would like poke my head out and be like, what is that? And then eventually I'd start watching it and I was immediately drawn in. And then we started with the movies and John showed me he's got a specific order if anyone wants to know. You start with Star Trek 4 and then I think it was Star Trek 2 after that. So then, I became a fan right away.
So why the unique order?
Well, I thought, I didn't realize what a fan she would become.
In the 90s.
This was 30 years ago. We're almost 30 years married, but this was before we were married. And then she eventually wanted the Voyager theme for our wedding when we marched in. So she became a
Mhm.
fan really quickly. But I always thought, if you were going to if you're going to try to introduce someone to Star Trek, who might not be as familiar with it or maybe not as big a science fiction fan, four is always a wonderful gateway film because it's just a great film. As Ned Tannen said, who was an executive at Paramount, he told Harve Bennett and Nicholas Meyer that he would have made this movie even if it wasn't a Star Trek movie. So it was just a great film, a funny film, and certainly accessible because it was set in the 1980s. And then from there, I kind of went back. I did reserve one as the last film only because I love Star Trek the motion picture. There's so much to love about it, but I think it's kind of a unique thing that's not quite part. It doesn't flow into the other five films as nicely. So then we watched them in order: two, three, five and six. But one is kind of its own separate, unique thing. So that we waited on that a little bit.
Well, I was going to ask this question later, but I'm going to jump to it right now. Since you've done the making of Wrath of Khan, you're doing Search of, for Spock. I assume the Voyage Home is being worked on, or it's coming up next. I mean, right?
Can't say, but hopefully, our hope is that eventually all of the films get done, if not by us, by someone, because they all deserve it. There are really wonderful photos, stories that do need to be preserved and put out into the public. And because one of the toughest challenges we face doing the books is that they're 40 years old, and so there are people like Leonard Nimoy or Harve Bennett or Nichelle Nichols. You can't get their view now on what that was like then for them, and so you have to rely on archival interviews and so on for some people, and that's only going to get worse as time goes on. And really, these stories deserve to be preserved, I think, because each of the Star Trek films, every one of them had a unique challenge or a unique goal or something like that. For two, it was making certain that there would be a Star Trek. Is it a viable franchise at all? I mean, is it going to, you know, can we make Star Trek and make it into something that's long lasting and ongoing? And the challenge for three was to whether or not two was just a fluke,
Hmm.
because it was obviously wildly successful both critically and commercially. But now is the time for saying, well, is it the analogy I always give is Jackie Robinson playing baseball. That could have been a fluke if it wasn't for the wonderful African American players who came after him. So he deserves a lot of credit, but also the ones that come after have to continue that same struggle or challenge or whatever that happens to be. Obviously, that's much more serious, even though it's both entertainment, sports, and movies, but
Hmm.
a more important issue. But each of the Star Trek films had to achieve something in order for it to continue. And so that was, I think, those are stories that we think were worth telling.
So, as you said, they're both unique films. In the researching and developing of their backstory, everything else, and in the making of book, what was the primary difference in maybe themes that came up from Wrath of Khan versus doing the Search for Spock?
I think with Star Trek 3, we were able to get more interviews because of our success with Star Trek 2. When you are talking to somebody and they realize that you're not fishing for gossip, we're not here to bash Star Trek, then they start to trust you, and then they say, "Oh, have you spoken to so and so? I have his contact information." And so it helped us to get more interviews for Star Trek 3 because of our work on Star Trek 2. And then part of it is also what Paramount has, what different archives had, and they're spread out. So Robert Fletcher's material is at Harvard, and we were able to get very beautiful, you know, drawings that he did. And then another challenge is then like, what do you put in the book? There's so much. And we wish we had twice the number of pages and double the number of words because there's so much that gets left out. And then with the interviews too, some people are so generous with their time talking to us for 2 or 3 hours, and we can't put all of that into the book.
Is there then a volume two coming, maybe perhaps like supplementary?
Well, I would love to. I think one of the things that, I know that I have maybe a naive view of the digital world, but I know when they did uh, J.W. Rinsler's Star Wars books, which are to me sort of the benchmark of all making of books, try to achieve what he did. with the 3 Star Wars books that were done before he passed away. They when they did the digital editions of them, they added stuff, not only print material and photos, but videos. And I would love to see that eventually happen with Star Trek, because in the digital editions you can, yes, you're limited in certain regards with what you can do, but it's much more um, freeing than 192 page limit, just because of the realities of costs and really tight and wanting. These books really are beautiful. When we send them to them, we always warn people when we send back the manuscript to them to have them double check the quotes and the information in them, that it's going to look really ugly and because it's just us slapping a picture in the document, and it's not placed beautifully. The graphic artists, especially Will Robinson, who had done the previous 2 books for us, um, they didn't get their hands on the book yet, so it's not going to look beautiful. So Titan really does a wonderful job making these beautiful books, in addition to, we think, the text is worthwhile. So um, but I would love to see digital editions where it's expanded, because
Mm.
we're fortunate to have these in our archives, and maybe someday we can get permission to share the larger interviews, with people.
Well, going to what Maria Jose hinted at, and you have to go into details about, but are there juicy details about making this film that you were not allowed to share because you didn't want to say anything that was negative or questionable? I'm not going to ask you to actually say what those were, but do they actually now exist somewhere in these archives that you couldn't share?
Well, yeah, there's always off the record comments that are made.
But there's even things like things that we thought we could put in because they were either owned by Paramount or done by Paramount that we weren't able to put in the book. For example, there's a picture of Lucille Ball that we thought we could put in and we weren't able to.
Yeah, there's a great picture. It's Lucille Ball and Charlie Bluedorn, who was the head of Paramount, who greenlit Star Trek into the movie world, and also courageously greenlit Star Trek 2, even more than greenlighting Star Trek 1. Because Star Trek 1 was kind of like a no-brainer. You had Star Wars, of course, you're going to try doing Star Trek movie, but something like Star Trek 2, that was kind of an interesting choice for him. Of course, he's just a huge figure in film history, Godfather. Just he was Paramount Studios, basically until the mid 1980s. And anyway, there's a great picture of him and Lucille Ball cutting the ribbon between Desilu and Paramount, when Desilu, so this was when Star Trek was on the air. This
Hmm.
photo, and it's a Paramount photo, but unfortunately, there's rules about who can be in what book, or things like that. But the nice thing is we're
Oh, and
oh,
rights too. So for example, the outside of Kirk's apartment, you see San Francisco, and that is taken from a corner of a larger painting that was done for the film Towering Inferno, but they didn't, I don't know if it was a cost issue, but couldn't get the rights to show that in the book. And then another one was Khan's wig was used in Nicholas Meyer's film
volunteers.
Volunteers, and we couldn't show that image. Again, I don't know if it was a rights issue or if it was cost, but sometimes it's things like that that they can't be in the book.
And I think we're pretty good. I mean, as just being fans ourselves, we're arbiters of what we want the books to be, celebrations of the movies. We don't. That doesn't mean we avoid conflicts. We do discuss in Star Trek 3 and in Star Trek 2, the conflicts that were existed while the film was being made. Nicholas Meyer's objections to adding a coda to Star Trek 2, where we see Spock's casket, and so on. Some of the conflict that existed between Gene Roddenberry and Harve Bennett, and so on. So we're trying to tell the whole story um, in a truthful way, but we're also not, unless we're also looking at it, I think, from a researcher's point of view. So we're both, I retired a couple years ago, but I had taught sociology for almost 30 years, and Mary Jo is still teaching sociology. So we approached it that way, where if we couldn't verify something, we were less inclined to include it. So
Mhm.
and we also wanted to sort of not bust myths, but test myths, if I could speak, a little bit. Uh, so we wanted to do, the was Star Trek 2 a TV movie? That's one of those things that keeps kind of getting talked about and is talked about this way that, well, we had the memos. So we were able to finally answer that question of when was it a TV movie? Was it a TV movie? That kind of thing. So we tried to approach things that way, and a lot of times the any kind of salacious information, it's not verifiable anyway. It's somebody saying something about someone else. Saying that, I would say 99% of everything we've ever talked to about people, they loved being in Star Trek. They loved working on Star Trek. We would occasionally be asked to phrase things diplomatically, but never anybody asking us not to include something, or because most people were not negative about their experience. It might just been maybe they had a conflict with, like, as in anything, a debate or a conflict about art or work,
Mm.
something like that. And they just wanted it phrased in a way that was fair to the other person. So that's never really been a big issue. But yeah, there were the big disappointments were things like we really wanted Lucille Ball in there, because she's never been in an official Star Trek publication before that we're aware of. We could be wrong about that, but at least from our eyes, we never saw that. And we did want to give a little bit of credit to Charlie Bluedorn, and we thought, pictures help do that, but
Mm.
unfortunately, we weren't able to have that in there.
And I mean, some of the interviews that you guys scored are amazing. William Shatner, Adam Nimoy, Robin Curtis. How do you guys score so many very cool interviews? As someone who does interviews, how did you score these awesome interviews that you guys managed to pull off?
Well, that's kind of like our workaround. So if the person has passed away, then we try to get a family member. So in the case with Wrath of Khan, um, obviously Montalban had passed away, but we were able to contact his daughter Anita, and we were very fortunate because she passed away shortly after she was able to answer our questions. So sometimes we're able to do that. And again, we were talking to Alan Miller,
Hmm.
and he said, "Oh, you should interview." Um,
The widow of
yeah,
Philip Allen.
yes, and then we didn't know she had passed away. So then we were able to get her son, their son, Keegan Allen. So um, it's sometimes it's like that. It's trying to find, okay, well, if we can't get this person, maybe we can get a relative, or when we're talking to somebody and they give us a name, that helps us.
I think too that we've been pretty uh, uh, we've been pretty fortunate. Before the books, we were doing a lot of presentations at conventions, so we wound up establishing relationships with some of the behind the scenes people, and that became kind of an opening for us because they knew somebody or they knew someone else or whatever. But a lot of it is just emailing and letting people know the mission of the book is to our job is to try to make the credits come alive. So what we want is for a fan to watch the movie and go, oh, I know who Gain Resher is, or I know who Charles Correll is now. I know what they look like.
Mm.
I know what their contributions to the film were. I know what a director of photography did on Star Trek specifically, and how that might have been different than, say, on other films. We really wanted to celebrate not only the actors, because that's, of course, you celebrate the actors, but we wanted to celebrate the people that did the stunts, people that were stand-ins, people that were the production design, ILM, model makers, really everyone who we could try to focus on. We tried to do that because we really wanted to see this is a team of people coming together. They've got limited budget, limited time. In the 80s, limited technology, and yet they were able to produce, things that are important. Sports are important, art is important, and Star Trek's important. And so, that I think once people knew that that was our goal, that really helped us with getting interviews with people, and really so we not just interviews, resources. Vaj in this book, Vaj Potenza, who plays little Spock, He gave us just photos of his ears and photos of his just photos of his of the premiere party invitations and just things like that. Robin Curtis gave us a lot of just wonderful information, and she's a delight. In 3 hours we talked with her, and we had known her a little bit before then, but I had admired her, but we really got to know her in that interview, and
And
she's
she remembers what she
everything.
wore to her audition. So great details.
Everything.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that was, and when you're talking to, we were very fortunate talking to, both William Shatner and Alan Miller are both in their 90s,
Mm.
and they could run. I mean, they could physically run laps around me, and mentally run laps around any 20-year-old. The memory and the enthusiasm and the joy, it was just wonderful talking to both of them about the film. So that
And
was
and
just.
this is another reason why we are so happy to be able to do these books, and we hope again that Titan does the rest of them soon because again, they're all aging.
And Alan,
We're aging.
and just Alan Miller was a good example. He plays the bar alien in Star Trek 3, the one who kind of talks a little bit like Yoda, has Yoda ears, that kind of thing, sort of just drooped down. Um, I never knew what he looked like um, outside of makeup. And then the moment I saw him, I was like, oh my God, that is Alan Miller. Alan Miller is on every television show I've ever seen in my life. He's always just a constant professional guest star on a lot of shows, and everybody knows his face. I think when you see him, he's like Charles Lane. If you've anybody who watches '60s television, and so Charles Lane was a character actor who was just in every single show you could possibly imagine. Beverly Hillbillies. He was probably most famous for Petticoat Junction. Things like that, and he's just on every. You're like, oh my God, he's on this show. Oh, he's on this show. Oh, he's in this show, and always playing the same kind of. He always played like a bureaucrat, Charles Lane. But Alan Miller was just, and then to hear his life story and his experiences during World War II, and just how he got into acting, and just incredible, incredible person, incredible artist in his own right in terms of directing things like that. Um,
And he's still working.
and he's still working. And he's just an amazing person, and so it's a privilege to get to interview people with that kind of 70-year career,
Hmm.
and it's incredible.
Well, he's definitely someone I would love to talk to one day. So that I'm amazed with just how many amazing interviews you scored, and I think some of the stories you tell in the book are ones I've never heard of ever. And the one that struck me as the most I would have thought I would have heard it by now, but I never did, is the William Shatner fire on the set story that you shared. I figured that's something that would have been better known to me as a Star Trek fan, but I never heard that story. So can you kind of give me a little bit of where that the information on that story? How did you verify it? What did Shatner? How much more of the story is there that he didn't share? Can you kind of break that one down a little bit for me?
Yeah, sure. I remember when that occurred. As a fan at the time in the '80s, I remember there was an Entertainment Tonight story on it. They had featured William Shatner in that story, um, and it was a big story beyond just Star Trek. What happened uh, it was, and this eventually, you don't know this at the time, but as you go through and you do the research on it, and we did a lot of newspaper research, interviewed a lot. We always asked everybody in every interview, basically,
Mhm.
were you there for the fire? What happened? That kind of thing. So we got a lot of pieces from people that were there, but a lot of it was through both talking to William Shatner and and other actors and behind the scenes people who were there. And I mean, Ken Ralston talks about they had a couple of problems on this, a couple of accidents on the set. And that was interesting to hear those stories from the ILM sort of side of things when they were there. But a lot of it through newspaper archival research, things like that, just really looking at it like you're looking at any historical event. But what wound up happening was the fire was deliberately set. They don't know by who, but it was deliberately set on behind the tattoo shop facade. It was on one of the street sets, you're talking about old sets that had been built, 40 years before or longer, made of wood and other chemicals and incendiary materials. And so that the set went up like instantaneously. The main set that was destroyed was the famous New York City set.
Mm.
So if you've seen The Godfather, it's in that film. It's the where Laverne and Shirley do the Shamil Shamazel Haas and Pep Incorporated thing. That's we've everybody's seen that set 1,000 times before in all these different movies and television shows. That got burned down basically to the ground. Um, the fire was so bad it wound up affecting there's a cemetery that's right next door basically to Paramount, and it wound up going there. There were embers that made its way to to where some of the famous celebrities are buried, and grass on fire, trees on fire there. And it did get to the sound stage where they were filming, where the Genesis set was at. And it was literally sort of licking on it was so close to that there are holes in the ceiling. You can see images in the particularly in the Entertainment Tonight report, because they were there that day. Um, there's holes, and you can look up and you could see you see the cactus with the snow on it, that kind of, and then they pan up and you got holes in the ceiling, because the fire got to the set. So William Shatner was there that morning, getting ready for his filming. Noticed the fire. There was a hose nearby, and he started putting the fire out to try to save the set. And as he put it, which we thought was really interesting, he wasn't there to save the day like we think of a hero saving the day. He was there to save the day, meaning the day of filming, because he had literally no time. It was done with Star Trek 3, and I think it was either the day or the day after he had to report for TJ Hooker for the new season. So that's really one of the reasons he wasn't even considered as a director for that film, because he couldn't. There's no way he could have stayed on for post production, and also he had no. There was no latitude in that schedule. He had to get done when he was supposed to get done, or else he would have wound up, as he said, getting sued by by somebody. Would not have been happy. And you can't do TJ Hooker without, it's not like you can work around him really, because
Mm.
he was in almost every scene. So um, it was just a frightening, very dangerous situation. The firefighters actually eventually asked Shatner to basically stop helping, because the the chemicals that were used to create the set were dangerous. Not only were they sort of explosive, they were noxious, just breathing it in. So it was very dangerous what he was doing, but he was trying to sort of save the day, as he says. But they did continue filming that day. They filmed Uhura's scene, really one of our favorite scenes in the movie, where she is excuse me, she is in the transporter room with Mr. Adventure. So they were filming that in another area while the fire was going on. So they did. Leonard Nimoy was very concerned about keeping on schedule, being a sort of first-time Hollywood director. Anyway, he had directed other things, television and plays and independent films, but never a big Hollywood production before. But yeah, it was amazing event, and they were still able to finish on time.
Mhm.
Because the funny thing is, it sounds like such a Shatner story. Because consider his reputation of having kind of a bigger ego and stuff like that, very much so. And that just sounds like a perfect Shatner story. That it's almost hard to believe that's real, but it totally is real from the story. That's amazing.
Yeah, and Charles Correll, who is the director of photography, was talking about it. He had passed away, but this was from an archival interview of him, and he had wanted to film in Hawaii, the movie, because he thought Hawaii would make a good exotic location for the Genesis planet. He wasn't thrilled about filming on a soundstage. He understood the reality. They couldn't film outdoors because they needed a weird environment where you had snow on cactus. You can't really replicate that in the real world in a controlled way. There were stunts that needed to be done. I mean, they needed to fling
Trapdoors.
trap doors, the Klingons flinging over, because they had a fire come out of the set. I mean, because you had to have Genesis fall apart around you. But when he heard about the fire, and he talked about Shatner helping to save the day, um, he said he sort of secretly was sort of wishing that the fire had gotten to the set, because then he was like, then we could go film in Hawaii. But he had a kind of an interesting sense of humor, Charles Kurell. But no, I mean, so many of the people we talked to talked about William Shatner helping really um, to preserve part of Paramount's history, because that stage that they were on is just also an important stage. Besides the fact of the danger to, obviously, the real danger there were to actors and the people that the behind the scenes people that were working there. You start losing sets like stage 8 and stage 9. You're losing sets, stages where some of TV's most famous, you know, programs were filmed. So it was just, it was a devastating, cost about $3 million in damage, and that's putting that in the 1980s money.
Hmm.
Um, and so probably $10 million worth of damage just because somebody wanted to start a fire in a on set for whatever reason.
Mm. And I think another fascinating thing about your book, and I think what I liked a lot was there's a foreword written by Robin Curtis, which basically states that this book helps bring to life Leonard Nimoy and Harve Bennett, who, as you mentioned, both died in 2015, the same year. What does that mean? What does that statement mean to you both, to think that you're helping to preserve these men's legacy, and because they can't speak for themselves, you're speaking for them in many ways through the book?
Well, yeah, that's an obligation. We when we take it very seriously, because and it's an honor. If you, I always say, if you had told my 10-year-old self that I would at all be tangentially, remotely, well, if you told me I'd be married, I'd be shocked. But find a girl who liked me. But if you told me that I was going to, be helping co-author with my wife a book about these films that I loved, I would have said, yeah, okay. Um, when Star Trek 4 came out, my parents actually were in Monterey, at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, by chance. My parents were not fans. They saw everything because of me, right? My mom bought the toys because of me. They knew Star Trek because of me, and would watch the things with me. But I was the fan. But I was in high school, finishing high school at the time, and my parents went to California to visit my brother and his family, and they were at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it just so happens they were there the day they were filming Star Trek 4. So my dad gave up his whole day at the aquarium and filmed. My dad had a big giant video camera, 1980, uh, six video camera, and he filmed them filming Star Trek 4 there for me and brought it home. And so when they got home, I had this wonderful treasure of seeing William Shatner, seeing Leonard Nimoy direct, seeing him it was sort of the walk and talk scene, where they're talking about whales with Jillian. And I really got to see a little bit of sort of the making of, in a way I had, raw making of footage. Couldn't believe they let him film, but it was a public aquarium. What could you do?
Mm.
And back then there was no YouTube, so who cared, right? What were you going to do with it? You couldn't do anything with it. I was trying to figure out what was going on. Why are Kirk and Spock on Earth? What is this with whales? Because you didn't know anything about the film, and that started me on a really lifelong fascination with behind the scenes, how films got made, and how the Star Trek films in particular got made. And so I devoured everything I could read about it, and um, you know, to me, to add anything to that, to be able to preserve those stories for us, I think is a privilege, because I have making of books. I have Stephen Whitfield's making a book from the 1960s, and he's been gone now probably 20 years. He did a Voyager book, um, but somebody after we're gone, 50 years from now, maybe 150 years from now, it'd be better if I can be gone 100. But I'll take 50 years. If someone will give me 50 years, I'll take it. But
I also think it's important to talk to as many people as you can because everybody's got their own unique experiences and memories. Vaj remembered what it smelled like on the set of Genesis, especially because there was so much soil that was used. He had there was a mix up with the ears, so the young Spock and then the teenage Spock, the ears got mixed up. So when you talk to people, they have their own, you know, memories of the set and the experiences with the premiere. Robin's experience with the premiere was different because of what her father was going through, what her family was going through. So we love talking to as many people as we can, and we think that's important,
Mm.
especially to get that before they pass away. But to share that with people, because some of these stories are gonna we're never gonna hear, if they're not spoken to,
Mm.
if people aren't interviewed.
It's similar. It's similar to, I think, genealogy.
Hmm.
I implemented whatever it was 10 years ago or so in my classes before I retired, an assignment, an ancestry assignment for our students, because we spend a lot of time learning world history and you know textbook history, which is important, of course, but there really is no more important history than the history of your own family, and to know where you came from and what your ancestors went through and how you got where you're at, and all of that. And a lot of us kind of know the same stories that are told every year at holidays, or they hear the same story over and over again. But we really wanted them to do a dive into figuring out who their family was, and that we feel that's, in a way, this is a type of ancestry research. It's it's a chance to sort of preserve the memories of people, um, and I think, interestingly, from a vantage point of 40 years, because part of the problem when you do a making a book, when a film is just out, it's the same thing of looking at history. I mean, no one, you can't predict whether a policy, a law, what's going on, what that's going to be like 20 years from now.
Mm.
You don't know. You don't know if it's a successful idea, a good idea, and whether it's a work policy or putting a stop sign in a community or whatever it is. You never know consequences till much later, because you have to give time for manifest and latent consequences to come through. And I think when you get up making a book that's done in the moment, it has the benefit of everybody having fresh memories. That's huge, and I think it's great. So, like, Elizabeth Shatner's book on Star Trek Five is a favorite of ours, because that is just a great making a book done, and writing as everything is happening, it's being written. Fantastic. I think Terry Irvin did that on the Deep Space Nine sort of making of book that he did. That was, he was sort of there for a lot of it. And I think that's the benefit of that. The downside of it is you're not getting any hindsight, any reflection, in a way.
Mm.
And so 40 years later, we have to contend with the fact that people may not remember everything. But you also
And
get,
sometimes you get conflicting
and you
stories.
get conflicting stories about who created what idea. That's always tough.
Yeah.
So those just get left out of the book. When we hear that so and so, that was my idea, and then we hear something, that was my idea. Well,
Sometimes we have three people claiming credit for
yeah,
something.
and it may be that all three of them did come up with the idea, but you don't know, so you're just like, I'm just gonna leave that out if I can. That's easy to edit out. So yeah, it's an incredible honor to be able to do that, and which is one of the reasons we try to get family in as much as possible into the books, because whether it was Julie Nimoy or Adam or Keegan Allen, um, or Anita Montalban, because then they're able to speak a little more
Mm.
for that experience.
And even like the kids might remember something that the parent might not have said in an interview. So Adam Nimoy remembering hearing his parents go through their lines, or people who came to their house for the auditions. Anita remembering, her father getting up early, 3 a.m. to work out for 3 hours. Maybe if you had the chance to interview Ricardo, he might not have mentioned that, or sometimes the kids will have a different memory
Mm.
or will share more.
Or they'll think something is extraordinary
Yes.
that the parent thinks is ordinary.
Right.
If when we found out that Ricardo worked out 3 hours a day for the role, that was to us a fascinating, wonderful heartwarming in a way thing about
Mm.
his commitment to
Yeah,
playing this part.
his dedication.
But from Ricardo's point of view, he probably, of course I get up. I just,
Yeah.
of course, it's just normal for him, but maybe through the child's eyes, they're seeing it a little differently than the parent does.
And I think another thing I found fascinating about when I was reading the book, because everyone knows, well, not everyone, but if you watch the movie Search for Spock, you obviously know what happens in the movie, right? But your book highlights where the movie could have gone or could have been if things hadn't changed. And when you read what it could have been versus what it is, you realize in many ways, like almost like survival of the fittest. The best ideas did rise to the top. So, can you kind of like tell me a little bit about what it was like in those insights of what the movie could have been, and how people thought about maybe, or how you thought about what the movie potentially was before it turned out to be what it was at the end.
We're going to talk about Galt.
Yeah, there's so many things. There's
Galt was our favorite.
yeah, originally Harve wanted it was going to be the Romulans. Nimoy thought that the Klingons would be more dramatic, more cinematic. Um, there's instead of Valkyris, who hands over the plans of Genesis, it is a Vulcan spy named Galt. And at the end of the film, we find out that Galt is actually Spock's brother. And this is a good example of how ideas don't go to waste. Well, not Galt, it'll be Sybok, who is Spock's brother, but the idea of Spock having a sibling doesn't go unused. So um, uh, um, Nichelle Nichols, that Mr. Adventure scene wouldn't have been in film if it was Bennett's original idea. So you still have the stealing and the destruction of the Enterprise, but there's an extended um, uh, scene to that where the crew they're in San Francisco. It's the Chinese New Year. There's a traditional parade, and the crew are under a traditional Chinese dragon, you know, going through the streets of San Francisco. So there's a lot of little things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Harv was wise enough to know that you want to spread the script around a little bit and get opinions. So people like Nicholas Meyer gave notes to Harv on Star Trek 3 on the story outline in particular called Return of the Genesis. Um, and some of his ideas that he gave to Harv are included, particularly the idea that it needs to be about something more than what you're be about something. Right. There has to be some idea there. And Harv would give fans copies of scripts and drafts. Bijou Trimble contributed on Star Trek 2 that way. Val Yeager, who is a fan, most people may not know her name at all, but she ran a fanzine for Mensa Star Trek fans. And she was close with Harv. Got to go do set visits on Star Trek 3, and would get opportunities to look at materials ahead of time to give a fan perspective on it. Walter Koenig would be asked to give fan perspectives on some of the scripts, as sort of an insider knowledge of it, and he being himself a published screenwriter. So he wasn't a person who wouldn't take advice or recommendations or suggestions. And Gene Roddenberry's notes would often, much more than people think, would wind up affecting some of the direction of these films. And also, of course, Leonard had a tremendous influence on the script. Once Leonard was brought in as a director, Harv kind of defaulted to Leonard on anything Vulcan. Well, of course, why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
And
Saavik is very different in Bennett's treatment. Bennett still has her half Romulan, but Leonard saw Saavik as a full Vulcan.
Mm. And I think another great thing that you guys do in this making of book is that you give maybe better what I'm thinking of is like star treatment to some people who you wouldn't normally have thought about because they're like the stars behind the scenes. Two names in the book that struck my interest was Teresa E. Victor
Yes.
and Mark. I'm gonna get his name wrong. Okrand,
Okran, yes.
Mhm.
who obviously had Bishop Mark Oakland had a huge influence in the what he did in the film, And I think a lot of casual fans, and in many ways, people, even myself, who does love Star Trek, didn't really know a lot about him. But you do shine a light on these people. How important was it to shine the light on those people who may be forgotten from by casual fans or fans who just don't go behind the scenes and think about who these people are and what they did?
Yeah, we call that crawling around the Jeffries tubes. Because the Jeffries tubes are where the heart of the ship is, right? And that's where Scotty always has to go in a Jeffries tube to save the day and repair something. And so these are people who don't all, their names are in the credits, but people may not necessarily know what they do or all of the things that they do. So yeah, Mark is Mark's important culturally beyond Star Trek because Mark is part of the team that put together closed captioning. So, I mean, that's a huge, huge benefit, not only to people who maybe can't, hear a television program, but just, um, the ability of sort of making everything entertainment more accessible to people. And so beyond that, important contribution that he did, um, uh, he really helped to formulate a formal guidelines to the Klingon language. Of course, Klingon language was really invented by James Doohan, really, and Vulcan also, because James Doohan was the person who kind of came up with the sounds for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where we hear those words, most of those words anyway, for the first time. And but Mark is the one who gives it I mean, turns it into a real language, not just sounds that match English dialogue, which is what they did, right? The actors in Star Trek One on doing the Kolinar scene are speaking English, and what they just did is do sounds, that sounded look like they were um, that way, and that was some, people like who would go on and work on Star Trek Four actually helped contribute to that language scene in Star Trek One. But there's so many people like that, like Mark, who contributes so much, and of course the Klingon language became a whole big thing on its own.
Hmm.
And that's really all due to Mark and his work with the actors. And then of course Teresa Victor had been with Leonard since oh gosh, since the original series, and was his main assistant. And she pops up in Star Trek sort of all the time, voices of computers or voices of the hospital in Star Trek Four. The hospital PA system, and so she really contributed a lot to Star Trek. A lot of the actors talked about.
Yes, we didn't even know she was a stand-in. We had a photograph that we got from Paramount Archives, and we didn't recognize the person. And when we were speaking to Robin Curtis, we asked, who is this standing next to you? And she's like, that's Teresa Victor. So she was helpful in identifying people for us.
And also, Robin talks about how Teresa, and actually several of the actors did, but
Hmm.
Robin told a great story about how, if you would go see Leonard in his office and he'd want you to read for him. So he would film you reading so he could show it to the executives. So you wouldn't have to come back 85 times, necessarily. Um, and so he would give the actor the what they were going to read, and then they would go out into the hallway to go over it and look at what they were going to say. And Teresa would help run lines with the actors and explain kind of what Vulcans were or what a Klingon was or whatever the role happened to be. And she probably helped get so many people for their roles through her kindness. So yeah, she's in Star Trek even more than you think.
Hmm.
She in Star Trek Four, as Mary Jo mentioned, she's the stand-in for whenever you see Amanda from behind. That's Teresa Victor, and also he plays one of the sort of beehive alien-looking aliens in the council chambers. By Star Trek Four, she wasn't Leonard's assistant anymore. She was kind of off doing her own thing, but he asked her to do some things in the film.
I mean, I really I love the book so much. Like I said, it was a great honor to be able to read it. But the other thing that you get obviously is a major factor of the book, and we kind of touched on it already, is Leonard Nimoy, the actor, as a director, as a person. So overall, what did you get a sense of him as those things, a director, actor, person, from all these interviews and all the research that you guys were able to do on him.
So many people talked about not only how kind he was, but he was a visionary. So he had ILM in um, much earlier than most directors do. So ILM was there pretty much at the beginning. They had input with script and story, and obviously with effects and sets. And then he also was very good with like stunt actors. He would have people over at his house to audition. With some people, it wasn't like a formal audition, it was a conversation. So you're just sitting across from him and he's asking about someone that you worked with on a previous film. And so he really made you feel at ease.
Yeah, and he did a lot of not just on three, but especially on four when he has the confidence, in
Mhm.
four. It's the we training wheels are off, as he said in four. He does some things that, so many behind the scenes people would tell us, like they never saw a director do that before. That was just in a genius way of using sound in a film. Mark Mangini, who's just a brilliant sound editor, sound designer. He was, telling us stories about Leonard, and just so I think, we both admired Leonard as an actor before, and Mary Jo's honorary granddaughter, from that time when he did that on Twitter.
Twitter, yeah.
But uh, we became really amazed at his. I think a lot of people too, not writing per se. I mean, we don't think of Leonard Nimoy as a writer per se, but he understood writing. So he had philosophies about things. He talked about the humor between Harve, the way Harve wrote humor, and the way Nicholas Meyer wrote humor. And he would pontificate, talk about that, about the difference between their styles of humor. And I think he leaned a little more towards Nicholas Meyer's style, but he he had ideas about how you all aspects of production, which I think a lot of times directors come in and they focus a lot on just the actors, and they kind of let like the other people kind of like just sort of do what they're going to do, special effects people or whatever, because that's not really their thing. I think you see that in a lot of modern films where they literally hire directors just to sort of be a name kind of thing, and it's assembled more by the studio.
Hmm.
They're cast.
Yeah, they cast the director really in a way, and the director is like, they don't even have a script. Sometimes they're just filming like, say this, say your name, say the name of this character in this scene. Now say that just in case we have that character in this scene. I mean, it's a whole nother thing. But Leonard wasn't like that. He let people, he listened to their expertise, but he would let them know what he thought or what he believed. So I like ILM would talk about how he would, when they would show him images of Vulcan for his approval, pre-production art or whatever, he would say, he would talk as if he had actually been to Vulcan, like it's a real place. But no, 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 no. This light was over here, and this thing was
Landing.
the landing gear was over this way on this, was around the mountain, not over here. And it was because he had a vision of what he wanted the film to be.
And to that point, he knew Star Trek. So, and he would fight for things like he fought to keep the Pon-farr scene in when an executive saw the daily and was like, "This is ridiculous. You can't use that." And he fought to keep that in. So he knows Star Trek and he knew what would work and what was right for the story.
And that's what I think Gene Roddenberry came around to the idea of Leonard directing. Initially, I think he was nervous about it, not because he was worried about his sort of skill or ability, that he had directed before, other things, but um, he was concerned because, as he told sort of the studio, um, you're hiring a director you can't fire, right? You cannot get rid of him because he's Spock, right? But I think when you see his other writings on it, he says he's kind of like he reflected on it and he realized, but nobody knows Star Trek really better than Leonard.
Hmm.
And I think that stayed, that was true through his whole life. I admire the fact he was asked to direct Generations, and said no, because number one, he was used to coming into films earlier. this was sort of like a director for hire kind of thing, not because they were trying to be rude to him, but I think the idea of it came later to them. The script was done, they were ready to go, and but also he didn't like Spock's role within the film. He thought that Spock was just sort of there, and it was like, why we had a nice goodbye for Spock in Star Trek Six. We didn't need this extra little sequence. And I think when he did Star Trek 2009, that it gave a legitimacy to that. If Leonard wasn't in that film, he made it so people accepted the other actors in
Mm.
those roles. Not that they didn't do a good job in it. I'm just saying I think his presence legitimated it as Star Trek, because he never would do something if he didn't feel it wasn't doing a service to the Spock character or to Star Trek or to whatever it happened to be.
And so the other thing is when you're thinking about Star Trek 3: Search for Spock, obviously you're talking about legacy, right? This movie, and I feel like Search for Spock has an interesting place in fans' minds. Like there was an argument for a little while that the even versus odd movies, and but also at the same time I feel like Search for Spock has gotten more respected as time has gone on as a really good film, and it really is a good film. What do you think the legacy of this movie is now within the fan base, maybe in the collective conscious of Star Trek fans?
Well, I think I feel that way about all the films, to tell you the truth. I mean, certain films, two, four, six, had a certain there was a certain love affair from the beginning with them. I think Star Trek Five will have that too eventually. I think it's starting to. I think partially because there is, for Star Trek Five, there's no film where the three characters, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, are together so much. There isn't really a scene in that film except when Kirk is alone at the end, which is part of the theme of the story, where the three of them aren't together. Nicholas Meyer has a tendency of separating the characters from one another. Kirk and McCoy go off to Regular One in Star Trek Two. In Star Trek Four, Kirk and Spock have their adventure. McCoy is off with sort of Scotty. And in Star Trek Six, it's McCoy and Kirk who are sent to Ruapenthe. So he has a tendency of sort of separating the three of them throughout the story. Whereas Star Trek Five is just a really beautiful film because we have those three magical, iconic characters together in a film. I mean, it's true of Luke and Leia and Han, right? They're together in Star Wars for what, half an hour,
Mm.
but that's like the magical part of the thing. Like it's with the rest of the film, they're separated, and then Empire Strikes Back, they're separated for most of the film, and in Return of the Jedi, they start off together and they wind up getting separated. So it's that's a unique film, Star Trek Five, and I think eventually, whatever special effect shortcomings people might have, or what criticisms people might have, there's just going to be a lot of love towards that film because there's a lot I think to love. I feel that way about Star Trek Three also. It's an operatic film. It's a middle chapter, so it's darker. And it doesn't end. It ends interestingly on a hopeful note,
Yes.
but it's got a lot of it's dark. I mean, it's you've got Kirk loses the Enterprise, he loses his son. It's got the Grissom is blown, that whole starship blown up of people, but it as the middle chapter, it's this I think very important bridge between two and four. You couldn't have four without three.
Mm.
If I mean that's sort of stupid in a way to say that, but what I mean by that is they are inherently one. They are connected to one another.
I also think that the more time you spend with a film, the more you know about it, the more you're going to appreciate it. It's kind of like that idea of propinquity. You see this in movies, so you might initially not like a character on screen, but the more they're on the screen towards the end of the film or the program, you start to have like an affinity for them because you've spent so much time with them. So I think that the more people go back and rewatch three or read the book, I think you're going to have a greater appreciation for it.
And it's like ET, right? What Mary Jo's saying. ET is ugly as can be. Like the first time you see him. By the end of the film, you love him, and he's the cutest thing you've ever seen in your life. And it's because you get to know him through that story. And I think Star Trek 3, if people want to have a criticism about it, I think part of it is could be, well, it feels claustrophobic in a way, right? It feels like it was done on a set. It does feel that way. That's why ILM played a very important role expanding that film with their, when you look at those Vulcan scenes, they're beautiful. When you look where they were filmed, when you look at Occidental College and you see what was there when they filmed the landing and bringing Spock, I'm sorry, off when they carry him off the bird of prey and Uhura meets them and everything. When you see what was there and you see what ILM did with that, oh my God, it's art. It's beautiful art. It's fantastic. And so, yes, but they made that film for $16 million.
Hmm.
Empire Strikes Back, made 4 years before, was $30 million. So that's quite an achievement to do a special effects heavy film, um, which had a scope to it, uh, for $16 million in the short period of time that they were able to do it, and contending with all the problems they had, from the fire to uh, getting it going and getting it started, and who was the director going to be, and all that other stuff that delayed it a little bit.
So Star Trek: The Search for Spock, the making of film, like I said, I really love the book. It's visually great to look at. The stories are fascinating. Where can our listeners get it?
Really everywhere. You can get it through Amazon. Many retail bookstores are carrying it. You can get it through the Titan publishers directly. They have links to all the different sort of online places you can get it at. But yeah, it's got a very wide release. You can get it at Target.com, and some Targets are carrying it, things like that. And really available anywhere books are sold. And if they don't have a physical copy there, they'll order it for you. But we do hope that people really enjoy it, um, and that it's a tribute to everyone who worked on the film.
So when you guys are ready to talk about Star Trek 4, the making of, come back to the show. I'm glad to talk about it. I want to thank you guys so much for doing this for me.
Thank
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate it.
All right, have a great day, guys.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Bye bye.